Chosen one, this message didn't find you by accident. God led you here for a reason. This is confirmation of something you've always felt but never fully explained. Since you were young, you've carried a knowing, an inner sense, a quiet awareness, a divine alertness. Others may have called it being too sensitive, too observant, or too deep. But what they didn't understand is that it was a gift from the beginning, a spiritual inheritance, a protective force that God placed in you to guard your destiny. You weren't just intuitive, you were equipped. That voice you always heard, that feeling you couldn't ignore, that urge to withdraw when something didn't feel right. That was heaven's way of shielding you. You knew who to avoid even before they showed their true colors. You sensed danger even when there was no evidence. You recognized truth even when no one else could see it. And that knowing, that divine instinct, it wasn't just for you, it was preparing you for your calling. Let's break this truth down in 7 chapters, so you understand how deeply you've been protected, shaped, and anointed through the gift of knowing. Before we dive deep, make sure you like, share, and subscribe, because this message isn't just content, it's divine clarity for the chosen one. And to everyone who's been supporting through super thanks, may heaven multiply everything you give. Your presence, your loyalty, your spiritual hunger, none of it is ignored. I see you, and more importantly, God sees. If your spirit already resonates with this word, type 77 in the comments right now. That number is a prophetic signal. It means you're awake, aware, and ready to fully walk in what God placed in you since childhood. Not everyone will make it to the end of this message, only the ones who've known since they were little, that they were different, set apart, misunderstood, spiritually sensitive, and divinely protected. This is for you, because this message isn't a theory, it's a reminder, a spiritual unveiling. Every time you watch or listen, more of your purpose will unlock, more of your pain will make sense, and more of your divine knowing will come back online. You didn't imagine it, you weren't crazy, you were gifted early, and God has been guarding that gift ever since. Let's dive deeper. Chapter 1. You were different before you could define it. Chosen one, let's start here. You didn't grow into being different, you were born that way. From your earliest memories, you carried something. While others your age were still learning how to speak, you were already listening in ways that went beyond sound. You didn't just hear voices, you felt vibrations. You didn't just see faces, you saw through them. You didn't just walk into rooms, you scanned them with spiritual eyes, long before you even knew what discernment was. As a child, you couldn't explain why certain people drained your energy. You didn't understand why you avoided certain family members, or instinctively stayed quiet when adults were arguing. You may have even been told you were too shy, too withdrawn, or too sensitive, but none of that was true. You weren't weak, you were wide awake in a world that was spiritually asleep. You had the gift of knowing before you even had the words for it. You could feel when someone was pretending. You could sense when danger was near. And even though no one sat you down and taught you this, you just knew. That knowing wasn't learned. It was installed. It was coded into your spirit by the one who made you. God didn't wait until you were an adult to begin training you. He started when your soul was still innocent. You were different before you could define it, and for that reason, your childhood may have felt like a battlefield. You were under spiritual surveillance. The enemy saw the mark on your life, and tried to bury your light before you knew you had it. That's why you felt attacked so early. That's why you faced rejection, bullying, misunderstanding, or deep loneliness, before most people around you even knew what spiritual warfare meant. But through all of that, your gift never left you, even when it was buried under fear, even when you tried to suppress it, just to fit in, even when you ignored it to please others, the gift of knowing stayed with you. And not just to protect you, but to preserve your purpose. You weren't meant to be like everyone else, because you weren't called to do what everyone else is doing. That early sensitivity wasn't a flaw, it was your compass. It was the reason You didn't fall for the traps others walked into blindly. It was the reason you knew who to distance yourself from, even when they smiled in your face. It's why you never felt fully comfortable in groups that were full of gossip or competition or spiritual compromise. Something in you, that inner radar, always signaled, this isn't right. That's not just intuition. That's spiritual technology. And the reason this gift has stayed with you so long, the reason it never fully left, even when you ran from it, is because it was never meant to fade. It was meant to activate. And now it is. The gift of knowing didn't just protect your childhood, it protected your future. It shielded you from relationships that would have destroyed your identity. It kept you away from environments that would have silenced your voice. It made sure you stayed just hidden enough to be developed in private. Chapter 2. God protected you through what you couldn't prove. Chosen one, you've had experiences that didn't make sense to your mind, but they made perfect sense to your spirit. You've walked away from conversations where everything seemed fine, but your spirit was heavy. You've declined invitations that looked exciting on the surface, but something in your soul whispered, no. You've stopped talking to certain people, not because of drama, not because of offense, but because you could feel something shift. And even when you couldn't explain it, you obeyed it. That chosen one was God protecting you through what you couldn't prove. There were seasons when the warnings didn't come in words, they came as uneasiness, a restless heart, an invisible wall between you and what looked normal to everyone else. And in those moments, you may have questioned yourself. You may have thought, am I being too sensitive, too cautious? Am I just overthinking? But later on, sometimes months, sometimes even years, you found out the truth, the lies, the manipulation, the hidden agendas, the dark energy, the betrayal that had been waiting. And that's when it hit you. God wasn't being silent. He was speaking through your knowing. See, your gift doesn't always come with concrete evidence. It doesn't always give you a reason you can show to others. But it does give you instructions. It gives you a signal. It gives you that nudge that makes you cancel a trip last minute, or ignore a call, or remove yourself from a group chat that no longer feels safe. People around you may have mocked it. Why don't you just come? Stop being so paranoid. You're always so deep. But they weren't carrying what you were carrying. They weren't marked like you. They weren't targeted by the enemy like you. And most importantly, they weren't protected like you. Because what they didn't see, and what you now understand, is that this feeling you've had all your life was God's early warning system. It was your spiritual firewall. It was divine intelligence moving ahead of time, clearing the path, shielding you from things your eyes couldn't yet see. God was blocking threats behind the scenes, some physical, some emotional, and many spiritual. Had you listened to them instead of him, you would have walked into a setup disguised as a blessing. You would have entered relationships that looked holy, but were actually trapped. You would have sat at tables that were secretly altars of jealousy, gossip, and sabotage. You would have joined circles that looked inclusive, but spiritually enslaved those who entered. But God spared you, not through explanation, but through discernment. That's the beauty and burden of being chosen. You don't always get to know why, but you're still called to obey. You don't always get confirmation right away, but your obedience activates your protection. You don't always get to explain it to people, but you're not accountable to their understanding. You're accountable to heaven's instruction. Sometimes your yes to God looks like a no to others. Sometimes protection looks like isolation. Sometimes favor looks like confusion to those who can't see what you carry. But here's the truth. You were never paranoid. You were protected. You were never overreacting. You were under divine instruction. You weren't making it up. You were being led by the Most High. That still small voice, that holy discomfort, that sudden change of heart, that delayed decision, that missed phone call, that exit you didn't plan, none of that was coincidence. It was covering. And because you followed God when it didn't make sense, He's about to reward you in a way that doesn't make sense either. Chapter 3. You've been around danger, but never destroyed by it. Chosen one, If you only knew the full weight of what you've survived, you'd stop questioning if you're truly chosen, and start praising God for keeping you covered, because the truth is, you didn't grow up in the perfect environment. You weren't always surrounded by peace. In fact, many of the places you were raised, even some of the people you were connected to, carried spiritual poison, emotional chaos, hidden evil, silent war. You were in homes where anger ruled. You were around family members who were battling silent demons. You were friends with people who smiled with you, but secretly envied your light. You were in environments that felt normal, because you didn't yet understand what normal was supposed to feel like. But now that you've grown, now that your discernment is sharper, you can look back and say with full clarity, I was walking through fire and didn't even know it. There were people who tried to break you from childhood, words that were spoken over you, not as correction, but as curse. Adults who should have covered you but exposed you instead. Friends who were only close so they could compete with you, copy you, or betray you. And still, you didn't break. Why? Because you were marked. You weren't just lucky. You weren't just resilient. You were preserved. Some of those environments had darkness rooted in them for generations. Cycles of abuse, cycles of addiction, cycles of manipulation. And while others fell into those same traps, you sensed something wasn't right. You didn't have the words for it back then, but your spirit knew you didn't belong in that chaos. Something in you was always off with the atmosphere, even when everyone else called it home. That wasn't judgment. That was discernment. That wasn't rebellion. That was divine redirection. Even in moments when you weren't fully aligned with God, He was still aligned with you. He had His hand on your life before you had language for what was happening. And your knowing, that spiritual gut feeling that people tried to make you doubt, it kept you alive. It kept you in position, even when the world around you was trying to pull you under. There were times you distanced yourself from people for no apparent reason, and that distance saved you. You were never meant to blend in with what was going to bury you. So while others were asking, why are you so distant? Heaven was saying, because if they get too close, they'll taint what I've placed in you. Your knowing is why certain friendships didn't stick, why certain opportunities fell through, why certain relationships never got off the ground. Because while your heart was open, your spirit was watching. The spiritual danger you were surrounded by wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was subtle. A strange heaviness in the room, a confusing conversation that left you drained, a person whose presence seemed kind but left you anxious after every interaction. And still, you survived it. Not because you always understood, but because God was always covered. You didn't escape those things because of how smart you were. You escaped because of how protected you were. There were spiritual assassins assigned to your childhood, but they Chapter 4. Your gift made you lonely, but never lost. Chosen one. Let's be real. This gift of knowing came with a heavy cost. It came with silence, with separation, with long nights of questioning yourself, while trying to appear normal around people who couldn't see what you saw, or feel what you felt. There were seasons where your insight made you feel like an outsider in your own family. Moments where your discernment made you feel like a stranger among friends, and you wondered, why can't I just be like everybody else? But you were never meant to be like everybody else. Your gift made you different on purpose. Because let's tell the truth, this knowing didn't just give you information, it gave you revelation. You picked up on energies before people ever said a word. You saw the hidden motives in conversations that others called harmless. You felt the shift in atmospheres long before anything physically changed. And that level of spiritual sensitivity can feel lonely. But hear this, lonely does not mean lost. What felt like isolation was really preparation. God had to separate you from the noise to sharpen your spirit. He had to strip you from constant validation so that you'd lean into His voice instead of the crowd's opinions. Because the path He's taking you on requires clarity, not popularity, conviction, not consensus. There were moments when you stayed quiet in rooms where your spirit was screaming. You wanted to speak up, but something told you they won't understand yet, and you were right. because had you shared too soon, they would have mocked your message and possibly killed your confidence. So instead of putting your pearls before swine, God taught you the power of private obedience. That's why you started pulling back, not because you were bitter, not because you thought you were better, but because you could feel the disconnection growing. Your language was changing, your desires were evolving, your discernment was maturing, and the people around you were still playing with the very things you were being delivered from. And that's when the loneliness hit the hardest, when you realized you couldn't go back to who you were, but didn't yet have people who could walk with who you were becoming. But even in that in-between, God didn't let you get lost. You were never aimless, never abandoned. Even when people fell away, the presence of God never did. In fact, it increased. And the quieter your environment became, the louder heaven spoke. You started hearing confirmation in places you didn't expect. You started getting answers in dreams, in signs, in scripture. And slowly, you began to realize this loneliness wasn't punishment, it was refinement. You were being hidden to be healed. You were being isolated to be imparted into. You were being set apart to be sent back with power. Because chosen one, the truth is, what made you feel lonely back then is what makes you trustworthy now. God needed to test your ability to hear him, without applause, to trust your gift, even when it made you the odd one out, to keep showing up with integrity, even when no one clapped for it. Chapter 5. You didn't just know, you listened. Chosen one, your gift of knowing was never just about insight. It was about obedience. Having spiritual awareness is one thing, but listening to that inner voice, especially when it costs you everything familiar, is what made you unstoppable. You didn't just feel things. You didn't just pick up on bad energy, wrong people, or dangerous offers. You acted on it. You moved when others stayed stuck. You walked away when others would have compromised. You ended relationships that felt off, even if there was no visible reason to justify it. You exited rooms where your spirit felt grieved, even when your mind didn't fully understand why. And let's be clear, that level of obedience wasn't easy. It came with loss, it came with loneliness, it came with misunderstanding. There were moments you sat by yourself, wondering if you made the right decision, because from the outside looking in, it looked like you walked away from good things. People questioned your judgment. They thought you were being dramatic, difficult, or even paranoid. But what they didn't know is that you weren't walking by logic. You were walking by the Spirit. You turned down opportunities that glittered like gold, but your spirit said, "This isn't God." You declined connections that seemed perfect on paper, but heaven whispered, "Don't trust." You ended conversations that flattered your ears, but disturbed your peace. And that chosen one is rare. That's divine maturity, that's spiritual authority, because most people feel the warning but ignore it. You, on the other hand, you listened, you moved, you trusted, not just when it made sense, but especially when it didn't. And yes, it cost you. You lost friends who couldn't go where you were going. You lost support from people who only loved you when you followed their plan. You lost moments that could have brought you temporary comfort, but long-term destruction. But here's the miracle in all of this. What you lost didn't break you. It preserved you, because if you had ignored that still small voice, you would have stepped into traps, dressed as blessed. You would have clung to people who secretly resented your anointing. You would have attached yourself to environments that would have slowly killed your purpose. So don't mourn the things you walked away from. Don't regret the doors you didn't walk through. Don't second-guess the decisions you made in obedience, even when they hurt. Because here's the truth. God saw it all. He saw when you stayed loyal to him, even when it left you lonely. He saw when you kept your standards, even when everyone else was lowering theirs. He saw when you said no to what looked good, because you were waiting for what was God. And now he's about to reward you publicly for what you obeyed privately. Because while others were chasing visibility, you were protecting your vision. While others were building platforms, you were building depth. While others were people-pleasing, you were God-trusting. That's why your next blessing isn't random. It's recompense. It's not luck. It's divine justice. It's not coincidence. It's the harvest of your discernment. Chapter 6. The gift is stronger now, because you grew into it. Chosen one. This gift didn't stay small, because you didn't stay small. As a child, your knowing came in sudden waves, a strange feeling in your stomach, a dream that felt too real, a quiet whisper inside that warned you, or pointed you in a different direction. You couldn't explain it, but it was always there. Sometimes it showed up as discomfort. Other times it felt like peace in the middle of chaos. You just knew things, but you didn't always have the language for it. And more importantly, you didn't yet have the confidence to trust it fully. Back then you were called sensitive, dramatic, or too deep. You were told you were imagining things, overthinking or making things up. But God was already revealing that your senses weren't just natural, they were spiritual. That something's not right feeling wasn't fear, it was discernment. That I don't trust this person moment wasn't insecurity, it was divine warning. You weren't just reacting, you were receiving. But because the gift was ahead of your maturity, you often doubted yourself. Now you've grown, you've been through enough, prayed through enough, walked with God long enough to see clearly. You now know that your gift was never the problem, your environment was. You were hearing accurately, you just didn't have the support or structure to help you understand what you were hearing. But every misstep, every spiritual check you ignored, every gut feeling you later realized was right, it all trained you. God used it to sharpen you. So now your gift isn't just raw instinct, it's matured insight. It's not just a hunch, it's wisdom. It's not just a strange feeling, it's spiritual clarity. You now know the difference between paranoia and discernment, between fear and warning, between your emotions and the voice of God. You've learned to pause, to ask God for confirmation, and to trust the answer, even if it doesn't make sense to others. You've learned to slow down when peace disappears. You've learned to walk away when your spirit is disturbed. You've learned that no matter how appealing something looks, if it doesn't align with what God is showing you, it's not for you. This is growth. This is maturity. This is spiritual strength. Your gift didn't change. You did. You learned to honor it. You learned to protect. You stopped explaining it to people who didn't understand it. You stopped asking for confirmation from people when God had already confirmed it in your spirit. You stopped second-guessing what God placed in you. And because of that, the gift is stronger now. It no longer just warns you. It leads you. It doesn't just protect you, it positions you. You're not just sensing danger, you're discerning direction. What once felt confusing, now feels clear. What once made you isolate now makes you stand out. You are no longer overwhelmed by the gift. You've stepped into it fully. It's become your compass, your advantage, your covering, your assignment. The gift is no longer something you carry quietly. It's something you walk in boldly, and you didn't just inherit it, you grew into it. Chapter 7. The knowing isn't just for you, it's for who you're called to protect. Chosen one. Now that you've been refined by fire, now that you've grown into the depth of your discernment, it's time to understand the bigger picture. This knowing, this inner compass that's guided you since childhood, was never meant to stop with you. It was never just about keeping you safe. It was about preparing you to protect others. The same way God shielded you through your sensitivity, your instincts, your dreams, and your gut feelings. He's now calling you to be that shield for others. You've walked through shadows, with nothing but a whisper from heaven. You've navigated betrayal, confusion, and isolation with no one to guide you but God. And because of that, He can now trust you to sense what others can't, trust you to see through deception, trust you to speak truth when it's uncomfortable, and remain silent when silence is wisdom. You didn't just survive for survival's sake, you survived so others could thrive under your covering. There are people coming into your life who won't have the discernment you carry. They won't see what you see, but they'll trust you, because your presence brings peace. Your knowing will become their breakthrough. You'll recognize traps before they fall into them. You'll feel shifts in spiritual atmospheres, they're not even aware of. You'll pick up what's unsaid, unseen, and undetected, because the gift wasn't just for your protection, it's for their preservation. And make no mistake, this is a calling. You're not being asked to fix people, you're being positioned to cover them, to guide them, to intercede for them when they're blind to the danger ahead. Some of them will never even know what you stopped from reaching them. Some will never understand how close they were to destruction before your discernment shifted everything. But heaven will know, God will know, and the reward for your obedience will be great. You'll be trusted in ways that others won't. People will start to come to you, not for hype, but for clarity, not for approval, but for spiritual truth. Your discernment will make you a safe place in a loud world. You'll hear things before they're said. You'll feel shifts before they manifest. You'll detect motives before masks fall off. You'll see who people are in the spirit before they reveal themselves in the flesh. This isn't pride, this is responsibility. God didn't just give you a gift, He gave you an assignment to become a watchtower, to stand in the gap, to be a mouthpiece for heaven, in rooms where truth has been silenced, to be a spiritual light in atmospheres that have gone dark.